Do you remember back before the Passion, when Judas had already sold off Jesus for the 30 silver pieces? And they had their last supper, and they're sitting in the garden, and Jesus asked the disciples to stay awake. And of course they go to sleep. And Jesus is praying to his Father, and he's saying, "My God, why have you abandoned me?" Jesus knew he was going through the toughest part of his life, and he was going to suffer. And he was a little bit afraid. He was not looking forward to it. If we know we are going to suffer, we're not like, woo! Or a little trepidation. We have trepidation. I remember when I was a kid in grade school, we had a grade school, and Dr. Miller, we called him Killer Miller, he was our dentist, and he was just right up the street, and we had a walk up the street past the church to his office, right across the street from the church. And when I was a kid, none of my teeth fell out, so he had to give me 38,000 shots. And then put his knee up in my chest and pull. And so every time I had a dentist appointment, it was like, oh my God. We don't like to suffer. Jesus didn't either. He said, "Lord, Father, if this is not your will, take this cup away from me. But if it is your will, I will do it." Jesus felt fear and abandonment at that moment. But then he followed the will of the Father. And because he did, he died on the cross and rose. And for that, we have salvation. Out of death, God brings forth life. That's the whole Easter message. So now, the disciples, where were they? Peter was denying Jesus 3 times. I don't know the man because he was afraid. And most of them went and locked themselves up in a room because they were afraid. And they were feeling exactly what Jesus felt in the garden, because here they thought Jesus was the Messiah who was going to redeem Israel. And they felt abandoned and afraid. And they thought that they were going to be next. That's why they were locked in that room. Except for a few that were with Jesus when he was on the cross. And then these 2 walking to Emmaus, they're followers of Christ too. Cleopas and whoever, could have been his wife. But they know quite a bit. In that gospel, we heard them describe to Jesus, even though they didn't know he was Jesus, everything that happened, including the women who found the tomb empty, and including Jesus who appeared to them, or an angel appeared to them. And they still don't get it. They still feel abandoned. That's why they're walking 7 miles to Emmaus. Because we had hoped he was going to redeem Israel. Now we know he was not the one. So the more Jesus appears, the more the hope comes back. The more that Jesus is able to work, the more the Spirit is sent to the disciples. That's why we hear in the first reading in the Acts of the Apostles about how they moved from their own suffering into this courageous, non-fearful proclamation of Jesus the Christ. Suffering is part of it. And through suffering, we can grow so much, even though we don't want to suffer. Think about the last 3-4 days of all this rainfall. I was given this homily last night, and rain was just pouring down on the roof, and you could hear it, and everybody's going, including me, while I was preaching. And, I was sitting there in the second reading going, don't close your eyes, because you'll not wake up. That's how soothing the rain was. But it's also like, can we get a little sun? But all this rain, even though it's a lot, when that sun comes out, it is going to be beautiful. Because all the trees and plants and gardens are fed, some a little much, and it is blooming like crazy. Through this period, we have to always go through the rain and the storms to get to the harvest. And that's just what Jesus did. That's just what the disciples did. And that's what we do. We have to look at the times in our life when we do suffer. And we have to know that Christ is right there walking along with us. And when we are having trouble, we listen for Christ in the scriptures that we hear. We look for Christ. We may have a hard time recognizing him, but when something is said that hits us directly, it's like, wow. And the two going to Emmaus did not recognize Jesus until he broke the bread. It's all about our Eucharist. When we receive the Eucharist, we have Christ within us. And we know that he is with us throughout any and all sufferings we have. But we know if we don't fight it and know that we will get through that with Christ, with our community, with our family, that we will have grown somehow deeper in our relationship with Christ and one another. So think about today, if you are suffering, how is Jesus reaching out to you? If you've suffered recently or in the past, how did God help you? How did Jesus help you get through that? Did you make it tougher by trying to be alone all the time? Or did you reach out? Because Christ works through all of us. So just think about Cleopas and the other disciple, how afraid they were. But when they recognized Jesus and heard him explain the scriptures, their hearts were burning. And the adrenaline started flowing, so much so that after they ate dinner, they walked all the way back to Jerusalem, another 7 miles. God love them. But that is Christ alive in their hearts. And that's what we celebrate at Easter. Christ is alive in all of our hearts. And we have eternal life because he was willing to suffer and die. So that helps put our suffering a little bit in perspective.